We finally decided to venture into regional policing as our business model. I want to say we started in that in 2014, and by the summer of 2016, the once New Garden Township Police Department joined with another community in Chester County. We formed the Southern Chester County Regional Police Department, where I retired from at the end of the year before, so 2022. So time flies when you're retired, and frankly, as busy as I am out here in Allegheny County, I don't feel like I'm retired very much. Now, and I have been since 2021, I work for the state of Pennsylvania for the Department of Community and Economic Development, the Government Center for Local Government Services. I specialize, or kind of my niche, is coming into communities and talking about regional policing and how that may look as an option if the business model of your local police organization is being challenged by either its funding source or by through personnel. There are a lot of ways we can explore the question of what does it mean to have a sustainable organization. And I go to those communities and help guide them through that process. Just an idea of what that looks like in a sense of like regional policing here in the Commonwealth. I believe, just was writing a report the other day, not about forming a regional organization for a community that's thinking about joining one as an expansion effort. I think in the Commonwealth right now, we count 39 regional police departments. There are over 700 municipalities that form up those individual regional police departments. And across the nation, if you're looking at how many other regional police departments exist, there are only 4 or 5. The majority of them are in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania because there are around 1,100 police organizations in this state alone. That's a lot. That's a lot. And it's a limited labor pool these days. So that's where we can kind of address some of those issues as it relates to what is sustainability and how does that really work. Whether you can, be competitive in the labor market to attract professionals like what we have standing outside the door here, for when there's retirements or somebody's out on some type of injury, or personnel go and take their career somewhere else where they find a little bit more whatever reason they leave, right? So in the case of regional policing here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the organization I belong to, DCD, we offer as a free service to residents to come in and sit down and meet like this, kind of an informational session to kind of, what does that even mean? What does regional policing actually look like? Some of the maybe spell some of the concerns or fears that where there's a lack of understanding about that concept. And then we help guide now presently communities into that implementation process. Beyond being the chief of a regional police department, that I was kind of the steering voice behind it. I kind of was the person behind the microphone, kind of driving this organization. I've been a part of at least a dozen projects in and around the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania since I retired, primarily out here in Allegheny County. In fact, I was the Pennsylvania consultant behind the Eastern Regional Mon Valley one, which is over here in North Braddock, Rankin, and East Pittsburgh. I don't know if you've seen any of the news on that, but that is a newly formed regional police department which hopes to go operational here within the next 45 to 60 days, where 3 communities that were in need of enhancing and augmenting their local policing services met with some very interesting challenges and called us in, and we're able to guide them through that process of forming a regional police department. And there are a couple more projects going on around Allegheny County as it relates to this effort, but it's going across, it's happening all around the state. Been out in City Lackawanna, Luzerne, Clearfield, York, Chester County, of course, across the Commonwealth. So it's not a unique problem for any of our local residents. So let's talk about the process. What does it look like? So for the community, it is simply an ask to the Department of Community and Economic Development. You sign a letter of intent. There are no cost strings attached to this. We come in and we give you what's basically a letter of intent that you have to passed at a public meeting, and the reason why it has to be public is, you're going to be in public services, so that document is leveraged to employ us to do what's called a feasibility study. And what we do there on a feasibility study is we start to collect a lot of data. We start to collect, what's the population look like? What do your budgets look like? What do your current policing services look like? And all that information is pretty much collected within a 30 to 60-day period, and then that lands on the desk of a peer consultant who may or may not actually visit your community. We use a lot of different industry formulas to figure out what does proper staffing look like, to see if the budget is properly set up with what we understand the proper benchmarks to look like. For instance, I'll just give you an idea of that. For instance, so let's say, for argument's sake, your budget's $100,000. Keeping it simple, a benchmark might be, or is rather, 85 to 90% of that $100,000 is going to be dedicated towards personnel costs. The rest would be everything else, all the bells and whistles you buy, cars, fuel, and stuff like that. And that's, just simply put, simple math. But that's what we look at to see, is the organization properly oriented on its budgeting? We look to see, we use a formula created by IACP to make sure that we understand what your staffing needs look like based on populations, quality of service, and other factors. Once we do that, that report is published. It is made available to the community to talk about in a public meeting. We probably would do that either virtually, or somebody would come out here and say, here's what it looks like. And this was the way it was done up until about maybe 2-3 years ago. You would get this study, and it would be a much bigger packet of documents than this little guide here I'm holding over here, and it would give you all those details. But then we would leave the room. We would leave and say, okay, now best of luck with your regional policing project. That's how my merger happened. And that's not a fault. It's just in Pennsylvania stopped kind of right there at your study. Give it to you, and here's what you got. And now today, it wasn't my idea. I think I was brought on in part to kind of facilitate what happens next. A lot of times when you deal with, regional policing or accreditation, for instance, in a police organization, the mystery behind it is where the energy is suddenly lost, right? You don't have an opportunity to hear somebody, an experienced person, to say, well, this is how you actually now make this work. That's where I come into play. I then, if the communities that are involved in that regional study are interested, we then start to set up some meetings to talk about what do we do now to actually make this happen. Well, all regional police departments are set up under a charter agreement, or what's also known as an intermunicipal cooperation agreement. That's basically a contract would be Verona Borough and its partner that it wants to join with, whomever that may be. And that partnership, really, that charter agreement defines what that partnership will look like for the length of that contract. For example, and I'll tell you how I actually go about tackling the issues, because there are always things that communities may be concerned about. Costs, who's in charge? That's always the biggest one. Who is in charge of my local police department now? Because now it's no longer local, it's regional, right? And that comes with it, like, now that sounds like the state police or some other entity, right? But we addressed that early on. So that charter agreement deals with governance. How do the governing bodies work together to oversee the police organization? In most cases, or all cases, a police commission is created. That becomes the oversight body of the police organization. And that police commission is comprised of elected officials from the partner communities. And then we talk about, well, how do you actually have the power? We have a lot of suggestions on that, because it all really does come down to that fairness of sharing the power, because you need an odd vote. If you don't have two partners, you need a tiebreaker. So, for instance, you may have 2 members and a 1 member from the other communities. Well, that means one community's got 2 votes. But we have figured out a concept that seems to have grabbed on how to rotate that in a manner that keeps power balanced and fair. So no one community feels larger or bigger than the other, or takes on a bully kind of role. So we tackle those things early on in the charter agreement. Then we deal with what rules will the community follow as it relates to the administration of the police department. I don't know if Verona Borough is civil service. But there will be an option in that discussion with the elected officials on whether you adopt civil service, police tenure act, or you can give a nod to some of those other structures, governing structures, and then that will, you decide, the community will decide how will it actually administrate those things that oversee hiring, promotions, firing, discipline. So those are all figured out by the communities and then memorialized in that charter agreement. Filling the term. How do you dissolve it? Because everybody wants an out clause, like, okay, I'm going to venture into it, but just in case it doesn't work, how do I get out of it? Okay, and there are a few examples of failures in regional policing in the state. Just a few though. There are more success stories and continue to be success stories than there are failures. But to be honest, we have to acknowledge that there are some that did not make it. I would probably suggest that a lot of what they didn't address, and this was certainly before, and I'm not saying this is because of our involvement, but you know, it has to be a good partnership. There has to be some harmony and understanding and balance to that, right? And I often, when I'm in the meeting with the elected officials, I talk about like a marriage, right? You're in the wrong marriage, then why are you signing that contract? You probably should step away from the altar and not do it in the first place. But if you're in the right one, it can last a lifetime, obviously. That's what you'd want. So we kind of explore those common interests. And like it or not, you probably, and you don't, you know this, but I have to say, you probably have a lot more in common with your neighbors than you realize as it relates to the import-export of the issues you may be dealing with, whether it's a traffic issue, a crime issue, a quality of life issues. Those things don't know where the road signs stop at a borough begins and ends. That's not what happens in reality, right? Those things transfer right across jurisdictional lines with great ease and little thoughts about where your lines are at, right? Or how you see your community and how it's set up. So we work through all these things in the charter agreement. That takes, depending upon the will and or the energy behind the elected body, and I've seen it happen as quickly as 3 months, and I've seen it taking 6 months. I've seen it take longer. I've seen it take as long as a year, and suddenly they get to a deal-breaking issue that causes it to pause. What I do when I'm in a implementation project is that I put the hard issues up front. Let's deal with the ones that will probably cause you to say, hang on a second. Okay, power is usually the one. Who's in charge and how do we rotate that? How do we balance and make that fair so that the community knows that the money we're putting towards this effort, these services that are critical to you, we have a say in. So we deal with that. That's one of the first things we try to tackle. The next, frankly, is the money, right? So if it's not power is going to get you upset, it'll be the money piece. How much am I paying for this service now? So there are a number of ways, and we're not even anywhere near close. Give you some recommendations on that without having a study done, but we look at things and we give you some options as to how we balance out what is your fair share for the services that are going to be provided to your community. I kind of subscribe to keep it simple, right? When you start adding in other factors into a formula, I think it can get confusing. I think it also can appear to be like, oh, you're just making it so complicated. We can't understand it. And why are you accounting for like road miles or in one of them, for instance, like the amount of road miles, because a factor of more road miles in your community might mean that you're spending more time in that community because you got more roads to drive down over a longer period of time. I'm not sure about the weight of that, but so I kind of approach the project from, and it's really up to the community, but I'm just telling you how I approach it is from the per capita. If there are 10 bodies in this community and there's 100 over this community, well, there's the math, right? Figure out the math. Or if there's 200 here and there's 150 here, there's the math. In my professional and personal experience from my community, we were an 80-20 split. Why were we an 80-20 split? Because 80% of bodies lived in one community and 20% lived in another. And that's how the math absolutely perfectly worked. And it continues to work today. It just was simple to us. That's why make it complicated with all these other factors. One of the factors used would be crime data. Well, I don't want to put a police officer on a point here, but sometimes data can be a little skewed at times, right? And crime in one space can move to another space pretty quickly. So I don't know how much weight to put in that, but one of the things we do tell the communities to feel comfortable going forward is that have an opener or at least a clause in there that makes you look at it, right? So get 2-3 years into it, get some real data as to what's going on, see what, get the evidence. And then if you need to change or switch or adjust, you talk about it. And you make the necessary adjustment if something feels like it's a miss versus just feeling upset about it, address it. So we'll talk about that in the charter agreement and stuff like that. So you have a feasibility study done, you have a lot of data there, and then if the communities want to continue forward, they ask for that implementation service, they bring me in and or one of my colleagues in, and then we start to build out that, that charter agreement. When the charter agreement's done, there will be at some point is a public meeting passing, advertised of this agreement by ordinance, forming what will be the structure of this police organization for a period of time. Most charter agreements are signed for a minimum of 3 years. The reason why is that you can't get grant access, or access to the grants, I should say, unless you have a 3-year agreement. In other words, you can't get a COPS grant, you can't get a PCCD grant, you can't get a MAP grant. All those things will be available to you under a regional police department unless you have a minimum. So if you go 2 or a year, you've closed yourself off from at least access to helping shore up some of the financial parts of the organization. So after the charter agreement's done, then there is this, what I always describe as phase 2, which becomes the implementation of operations and administration. That's where we start to look at the departments and say, okay, where are we melding things at? And this takes a little bit more time than some may realize, but contracts, collective bargaining agreements. How do we make the collective bargaining agreements level up to each other? Because they can't exist separate or independent of one another. You have to have a single collective bargaining agreement or some type of agreement for your law enforcement officers if they exist in any one of the communities. Pensions. If there are pensions, we go through an actuarial process or guide the organization on an actuarial process to understand where the leveling up costs, or if there are, in trying to meld and or figure out solutions to the bringing the pensions in line with one another. Equipment, training, branding. What do we name the organization actually happens in the charter piece. We get input from law enforcement officials because we want to know what their thoughts are on those things. So that's very important to them since they're the ones pushing the brand of your organization. How you describe, how you name your organization. Each community is kind of taking on a unique approach to that. A lot you'll see, like my former organization, Southern Chester County, we're in Southern Chester County, we border the state of Delaware. This Eastern Regional Mon Valley, they are in the East region of the Mon Valley, so that's what they went with. And it makes sense because it becomes open and potentially inclusive to other neighbors that are in that area, which is a very strategic way to think. You name it X and X community, and you weren't a part of it, well, why would you want to join that community? If you already set a barrier up, that doesn't make sense, right? So we try to give advice that you want to make it as welcoming as possible, because the idea behind regional policing is to continue to look at strategy that may expand your footprint to help stabilize your overall financial health. And that's really what it comes down to. A lot of regional policing projects will start off with, we're going to save money. Policing is expensive to get it right. It's expensive to get it right. It's even more expensive when you get it wrong. And that is is a well-established fact. I don't think people like to hear that, but when you don't do it at the right level, you're just setting yourself up for the check you don't know you're going to sign one day for that bad event that may happen. I mean, from my perspective, it's the 40 years of law enforcement service in me and my continued service today across the Commonwealth. And actually, I still do work in New Jersey and the state of Delaware on other stuff. You know, I often want to ask communities, it's probably not the appropriate time to say this in front of a TV camera, but it's almost, you have to get into the business the right way or get out of the business. You're not required to have a police organization in your local government. You're not. Fire service you are, but not a police department. By law, there's no law here in the state of Pennsylvania that requires you to have a local police service, not for a borough. So it could be shut down. It could just dissolve and shut down and you'd be relying on the Pennsylvania State Police. So the first tackle is for any community is, what's our need? What's our need? And is it scaled properly for what you can afford? And for the officers. A lot of times what's missed in these conversations is that, you know, and I say this kind of tongue in cheek, but at the end of the day, when I started my law enforcement career in 1983, you know, I knew the minute I got behind that police car of this very small part-time police department, I was not going to push that car for 30 years. There was no way I was going to make that my career. I was going to go where I had a career ladder, where I was able to develop. So I could be behind this podium someday, talking to all of you nice folks, right? I knew and most people who want to give back and or help their community are driven to develop. They want to learn more. We're not talking just the training. They want to have educational experiences and experiences in their career where they can enhance their knowledge, skills, and abilities. That's hard for small towns to offer that. I knew in 1983 through 1984, that was not real there. So I left. I can't imagine that you've ever experienced police officers leave for something bigger, huh? No? Has that ever happened here? Where you had a police officer say, I'm sorry, I'm leaving, I'm going to go someplace else because this doesn't have the opportunity for me. Has that ever happened here? It's happening all over the place. It is. I'm being somewhat, well, it happens. So that goes back to that question. If you're going to have a service, what are your expectations? Okay. And God bless the men and women who stay with that. Okay. I respect that. And that's their individual personal choice. There's nothing wrong with that. But the reality of it today, they are still met with challenges in this environment, and they're not going away. They're not. They're only going to continue to grow and get greater, because that is our society. These challenges will will be confronted with. They have got to be prepared to succeed. They have to. And that's your job as the community officials to ensure that, to help them with that, to help them with their that career growth, the equipment needs, all the things that are put upon them today, whether it's a technology piece, an unfunded Band-Aid, or a policy change. You know, I could talk on and on about policy and going back to that, the check you don't know you're going to write. I mean, I know when I became chief in 2010, that was the first thing I did. It was the thing that kept me up awake all night, or kept me having sleepless nights while looking at policy that had the whiteout at the very top of the page where the community I worked for typed its name in. I could still see the other community's name underneath of it. That was their idea of embedding policy. Let's steal it from our neighbor. Let's plug it in. It referenced back in, this is 2010. That wasn't that long ago. The use of force was referencing carrying revolvers that we didn't carry. We referenced so many different tactics that were like, who does this? It's because it was written in 1975. And that's where the department was. It had stood still from that day that they embedded policy. They're like, we got it. That's not how that works today. That's not how that works today. And if you don't get and stay with the times, then you're rolling dice with the public's money. And these are the real challenges. That goes back to that question. Is it sustainable? Can you meet the demands of local law enforcement or law enforcement at the scale you're presently offering? If not, there are solutions out there. I don't think disbanding is the way to go in a sense. I do think partnerships are the way to go, which is why I'm here talking about regional policing. There's the other option of being a contracted, the client of another organization where you are you're buying contract for services from another community. That's always an option. And some communities like this. I mean, they do. So just what that means is, and we're not involved in that because we don't negotiate contracts with other communities. We are solely involved in the regional policing model. But you have a community that has the proper scale, have the resources, and then they contract policing services to you. And it may come at you at a very good price point. You may say, well, that's pretty good. We're getting what we're buying here. You won't have a voice at the table. That's for sure. That's their model. They're going to sell to you. That's how contract policing for the most part works. Some will listen and they will to some of maybe what you want. If there's problems with traffic at this intersection, they'll certainly will take that in. They're not going to be a very good customer. They won't have a very good customer service, and that contract would end pretty quickly. But so the plus to that is, or the pro to that is that it's contract limited term. You get your services you can get for what you buy. And then it ends at the end of it, or you renew it, right? Whereas a charter agreement, you're in a real partnership until you go through a legal step of dissolving it or disbanding it. So, which is a little bit more challenging, but usually keeps people on the same path together just because they know it works. If it is one, it kind of keeps you together. So there's, it just doesn't end in a moment where there's a disagreement and so on. So, and then before you know it, at the end of that implementation, you've married the training, you've married the policies, you've married the contracts, then you go operational. And before you know it, you have a full-time police service or a scaled to model police service that you can afford being delivered in your community. And that happens, it can happen usually within about a year's time from start to finish, if there is willpower in the communities to see that through. So I know I just rattled through a lot of stuff there. That is truly the 50,000 foot view. I provided this document, actually, it was a colleague of mine who does the feasibility study. He says, hey, Jerry, would you write down what you do when you get into the scene there? And this is it's also a 50,000 foot view of like step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, as to how you get into it. I have since found that there are things in this step, some of these steps that we've adjusted a few things here and there because they could probably be updated, but it's a resource available, a free resource available to the community to understand how does this actually happen from start to finish. These are the kind of the boxes we want to check to get to this space to provide policing services to our residents. Now, that was only 30 minutes. I promised about 40 minutes of conversation. That means 30 minutes of Jerry, tell me the horror stories or tell me the really good stories about regional policing or anything else you want to talk about in the local policing. But that's it. Are all of you residents, besides the lady behind the camera and no? All of your residents. You worried? Yes, sir.
As an outsider, I'm sure you've done your homework. Who do you see as our neighboring communities that are potentially set up for a charter with us who are induced by not being in a charter existing or not flat back pro neighbor that we might not know about?
So I'm going to out myself and think, no, I did not do my research on that. I don't know what your models look like around you. Okay, I know in conversation, but we've not done a study yet. That's where the study will start to drill into where are first of all, you have to have a willing partner, right? There has to be a nearby community that wants to be and wants to go down this road with you. You don't get a feasibility study done solely on the saying, I want to be a regional police department. Okay, with who? That's the first thing we're going to ask you, with who? Because we got to ask for their information. They've got to want to be a part of this, right? So that may be a challenge, right? That may be something where we have a discussion, with the community and some other in an executive session to talk about it, because like what this contract might look like, or what the relationship may look like, to strategically think, or maybe they talk among themselves to strategically think about how they extend that level of communication to one of the nearby neighbors. in my case, I made a phone call to my neighbors. The nearby borough chief, he was nearing retirement. He was looking for a succession plan they didn't have in place. And we were just talking one day, and I called him up later on. I said, hey, his name was Ed. I said, Ed, would you think your community, first, would you, and would your community be interested in sitting down and having a discussion about regional policing? And before I said anything else, I said, yes, I would, absolutely. Okay, all right. He was much older than me. He's more senior in the career field at that time than I was. And he says, would you mind, could we ask this name to the table? I said, as long as they want to come to it, sure. I mean, I'd say more the merrier. So that kind of started our conversation, started the ball rolling. From there, when coverage like this, the word started to get around that we were talking about this, we were receiving phone calls from communities that did not have policing services at all and saying, hey, can we join this? Can we join the discussion? Can we sit down and talk this through? Before we knew it, we had 7 communities in the room. Now, some of them were not genuine about their reasons for being there. That's a fact. Okay, that happens. Sometimes people just want to get the information. Hey, we gave the nod, we looked at this, but we really weren't interested in it. Those things kind of happen sometimes. I'm pretty good now trying to weed through that pretty quickly. Like if you're in this room, this is the task list of what we're going to try and get accomplished. And pretty quickly, the communities are not sincere about it.
So I guess more direct is, and I don't know,
Mhm.
Rosedale, Plum, Oakmont, Harmer, I mean, there's a number of communities, Penn. Do any of them already hold a contract that they would not be in charge with us just because you can deduce they're already participating somewhere else? Do you know that much?
I do not. And in fact, any of
A
them,
couple of municipalities, I just didn't know if you knew.
I know there are police, yes, I do know there are operational organizations around you. In fact, I was asking that with some other colleagues earlier today, that as I knew was coming up here from another part of the county here. Any one of those that have operations would be a viable partner, right? And frankly, if they're not thinking about it, I would say they should be. The sustainability question is not facing just small boroughs. It's facing places across the Commonwealth. I can't disclose, but I was in a conversation earlier today with a community that is in a really good shape as a solo operation, but they have finally come to the question, can we continue to do this? Is this makes sense where we can have, better or the same services at a reduction of, $750,000? I mean, could the public use $750,000 in a better manner? Probably, right? So it was about figuring out the scale and then the economy that goes along with that. So these things are happening across the Commonwealth, and while I don't know those other communities, and I'm not here to speak for them, I think any community should, ask themselves that question. Because sooner or later, we're all met with the challenge of resources that are going or not coming to the field. That is a real challenge in law enforcement today, of recruiting and attracting people to this profession. I was saying out in the hallway a few moments ago that part-time policing, which was the engine behind Commonwealth policing for the most part, has gone. It doesn't exist in a lot of places. You can't find part-timers. You can't find full-timers. How you want to find a part-timer? And I always say it this way. It sounds a little flip, but come work for me part-time so you can work the night shift, the holiday, and the weekend. And I'll give you X amount of dollars. You want that job? That was sold back in the day. And the current day. And is anybody buying it? You're welcome, sir. So I couldn't, that's the details of those things are more in that stage, but so I couldn't. Are you worried about it? Do you feel like you need services here, police services?
Yes.
Yeah. That's a fair and I think honest, accurate assessment. Council Chief, I'm sorry.
From your experiences, where have you seen the most as far as from a cost perspective? Where have you seen biggest improvement in communities that you've reorganized?
So I would say the cost in the sense of, I think it's the human capital. That's important. Right? I think you're attracting, and I don't mean this in any disparaging way. I really do not. I don't know your people. I much respect 4 years. My son's on this job in Delaware. But I think the human, what we miss sometimes, I said a few months ago, 85%, 90% of your costs are around what? The thing that makes the world go around. That's people. Because we're a people business, right? That's a fact. So improving the investment in the human being that is delivering those services, whether it's through education and training, attracting them to the job, giving them real career opportunity to ascend a ladder or get into a specialized assignment, priceless. Right? You put all that investment in these officers that are here for a little bit of time and they take it with them. That's lost. That's lost out of your community. It's to someone else's benefit, and I think that's sometimes missed. And so, to answer your question, I think when you start to have these organizations that are on a scale that offers that for the people that work within the machine, for the organization, there's the real benefit. That's where you get the bang for your buck, because. One of the things that's often said, and I'm going to get off the rails a little bit here, is that it's actually one of our documents. The disadvantages to local regional policing is the loss of your local police officer. That is the most overstated thing, period. It's in there. I'm going to argue with somebody in Harrisburg about pulling it out of there because that's a myth. I mean, you could get to know somebody in a 20-person police department if they're a properly led community relations oriented, not community policing, community relations oriented type of policing, which is not a philosophy, it is an action, it's a relationship you have with your community. You're going to get to know that police department and to trust it. And it will elevate, those behaviors will elevate its legitimacy. It's trust, which is really the marriage between the organization and the community. Yes, sir.
Can you speak to presence? So in Verona, we're about a half square mile. We have about 13 miles of roads and alleys. I'm fortunate to see a patrolman come down the road every day. How do you have a challenge having a small business district, going to the farthest corner of our charter partners, rural addresses, where they're not just responding to crime, but patrolling, having a presence in a positive sense ahead of crime? How do you convince me that the local presence, the patrolling I literally see on my street will still occur within this half square mile when we're extending it further beyond these bounds?
Well, again, you're going to scale your model, your policing model to the need, right? And I often, because this is one of the conversations we have in communities that are probably challenged in some ways greater than yours, okay? And I don't mean that in any disrespectful way, but we start to, or I, as a former chief, I'm a big believer in using evidence to drive my engine. Okay, so there's, like, for instance, this one community that we designed the patrol zones because there are no more there's no more Verona Borough and or blank community. You become a patrol zone. Okay, you become a zone or a sector within the regional police department's responsibility. So let's say, for argument's sake, or conceptually, that there are 3 or 4 zones, you'll be part of zone whatever. And if there are unique needs in that zone, maybe there's a carve out for like a foot patrol thing or a bike patrol thing. So all those things can be figured out. Okay, but will it be? I'll put it this way. Looking at this geographically from this one regional organization, there's a lot of land in this community with a golf course. Okay. Do we design it where the people are, or we design it where this great expanse of land is? So we try to put the resources where the problems are. And as I said in this one conversation, we've kind of, because the data's not real there yet, we split it up by the number of souls in each 3 of the sectors. And it's about evenly distributed, about 2,700 people in each 3 of the zones, roughly. And the one central zone is really big because of this golf course that exists, but there's nothing really happening there, so it can be larger. And the other ones can be smaller because it's densely populated with people. So we try to use the data And in this first case, we use it where, the people live. If the incidents or if you're using evidence-based policing philosophies, you'll start to focus in on where hotspot issues are to get in front of that, because trust me, you're either going to be an importer of those issues or an exporter of it. And that's a fact. I mean, crime only exists with three things being there: the victim, the suspect, or the opportunity. The only thing policing can really impact is the opportunity. That's where you put the resource to deny that opportunity. So if you were worried about some special issues, I mean, victims or people just ignoring their business, we gotta figure out how to deny the opportunity in those cases. So I don't know if that makes you feel better, but if I were your chief, I'd say, well, what's your name?
Me,
Yeah, Joe. Say, Joe, look, these are the times we're trying to focus on because this is what we're seeing. But if it's just a feel-good thing, I have to see the holistic picture of what's going on in the region that may impact you in another way. So it's not the ideal situation, but then I would say, well, can we sustain what we got for this one thing, right? And if the answer is yes, okay. It's not, then we have to figure out a different way to approach that. That makes sense? Yes, sir.
Are there any regional departments that do not have a common border, that may have a community in between them? Okay.
Yes, my former employee did.
Okay.
We had a non-contiguous community, actually it was the first partner, of 3.5 miles. In fact, the Pennsylvania State Police, had the land in between. As we like to say, they had the land in between, and we were a non-contiguous neighbor. And then we expanded into a contiguous neighbor because their problems, they were exporting their problems into our community. So we convinced them that this was like a no-brainer. So.
Does anybody else have any questions for Mr. Simpson, Chief Simpson? Does anybody on Zoom have any questions for Chief Simpson? Chief, I want to thank you for coming on. Appreciate your time. I want to thank everybody in the audience for coming and listening to you. And council has some questions for you, but that's going to be during our meeting, under Rich comment or council comments. We have to let the sunshine alone.
Absolutely. So to be clear, to ask, would you like me to stick around for a bit?
We'd like you to stick around a few. Yeah, you'll be at the beginning of the meeting.
I don't know if you were dismissed because I was going to leave.
I don't know if council has any questions, but
Well, it's at 4 o'clock, I'm joking.
yeah, so
Where do you have to be tonight?
Say again?
Where are you going tonight?
After this, I'm going to my hotel room for the last thing in Allegheny County. I'm heading back to Chester County tomorrow morning. So
I was just
we're
making sure you
fine.
weren't driving, okay.
We're fine, yeah, we're good.
yeah, I appreciate everybody coming out. I want to thank everybody for taking some time out of their evening to listen to Chief Simpson and I guess we're done.
All right, thank you, guys. My
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Nice to meet you. My contact information is around, so if you need to ask a question offline, feel free to reach out.
Everybody on Zoom, please know you're going to have to log off and log back in so that I can separate the recordings.